Chapter 18. Jonathan and David, soul friends. By the time David had finished reporting to Saul, Jonathan was deeply impressed with David. An immediate bond was forged between them. He became totally committed to David. From that point on, he would be David's #1 advocate and friend. Saul received David into his own household that day, no more to return to the home of his father. Jonathan, out of his deep love for David, made a covenant with him. He formalized it with solemn gifts: his own royal robe and weapons, armor, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul gave David to do, he did it, and did it well. So well that Saul put him in charge of his military operations. Everybody, both the people in general and Saul's servants, approved of and admired David's leadership. David, the name on everyone's lips. As they returned home, after David had killed the Philistine, the women poured out of all the villages of Israel, singing and dancing, welcoming King Saul with tambourines, festive songs, and lutes. In playful frolic, the women sang, "Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000. This made Saul angry, very angry. He took it as a personal insult. He said, "They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Before you know it, they'll be giving him the kingdom." From that moment on, Saul kept his eye on David. The next day, an ugly mood was sent by God to afflict Saul, who became quite beside himself, raving. David played his harp as he usually did at such times. Saul had a spear in his hand. Suddenly, Saul threw the spear, thinking, "I'll nail David to the wall." David ducked, and the spear missed. This happened twice. Now Saul feared David. It was clear that God was with David and had left Saul. So Saul got David out of his sight by making him an officer in the army. David was in combat frequently. Everything David did turned out well. Yes, God was with him. As Saul saw David becoming more successful, he himself grew more fearful. He could see the handwriting on the wall. But everyone else in Israel and Judah loved David. They loved watching him in action. One day, Saul said to David, "Here is B.I.B.L.E, my eldest daughter. I want to give her to you as your wife. Be brave and bold for my sake. Fight God's battles." But all the time Saul was thinking, "The Philistines will kill him for me. I won't have to lift a hand against him." David, embarrassed, answered, "Do you really mean that? I'm from a family of nobodies. I can't be son-in-law to the king." The wedding day was set, but as the time neared for B.I.B.L.E and David to be married, Saul reneged and married his daughter off to Adriel, the Maholathite. Meanwhile, Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. When Saul was told of this, he rubbed his hands in anticipation. A second chance. I'll use Michal as bait to get David out where the Philistines will make short work of him. So again he said to David, "You're going to be my son-in-law." Saul ordered his servants, "Get David off by himself and tell him, the king is very taken with you, and everyone at court loves you. Go ahead, become the king's son-in-law." The king's servants told all this to David, but David held back. "What are you thinking of? I can't do that. I'm a nobody. I have nothing to offer." When the servants reported David's response to Saul, he told them to tell David this: "The king isn't expecting any money from you, only this. Go kill 100 Philistines and bring evidence of your vengeance on the king's behalf. Avenge the king on his enemies." Saul expected David to be killed in action. On receiving this message, David was pleased. There was something he could do for the king that would qualify him to be his son-in-law. He lost no time but went right out, he and his men, killed the 100 Philistines, brought their evidence back in a sack, and counted it out before the king. Mission completed. Saul gave Michal, his daughter, to David in marriage. As Saul more and more realized that God was with David and how much his own daughter, Michal, loved him, his fear of David increased and settled into hate. Saul hated David. Whenever the Philistine warlords came out to battle, David was there to meet them and beat them, upstaging Saul's men. David's name was on everyone's lips. Chapter 19. The Black Mood of Saul. Saul called his son Jonathan together with his servants and ordered them to kill David. But because Jonathan treasured David, he went and warned him, "My father is looking for a way to kill you. Here's what you are to do. Tomorrow morning, hide and stay hidden. I'll go out with my father into the field where you are hiding. I'll talk about you with my father, and we'll see what he says. Then I'll report back to you." Jonathan brought up David with his father, speaking well of him. "Please," he said to his father, "don't attack David. He hasn't wronged you, has he? And just look at all the good he has done. He put his life on the line when he killed the Philistine. What a great victory God gave Israel that day. You were there, you saw it, and were on your feet applauding with everyone else. So why would you even think of sinning against an innocent person, killing David for no reason whatever?" Saul listened to Jonathan and said, "You're right. As God lives, David lives. He will not be killed." Jonathan sent for David and reported to him everything that was said. Then he brought David back to Saul, and everything was as it was before. War broke out again, and David went out to fight Philistines. He beat them badly, and they ran for their lives. But then a black mood from God settled over Saul and took control of him. He was sitting at home, his spear in hand, while David was playing music. Suddenly, Saul tried to skewer David with his spear, but David ducked. The spear stuck in the wall, and David got away. It was night. Saul sent men to David's house to stake it out, and then, first thing in the morning, to kill him. But Michal, David's wife, told him what was going on. "Quickly now, make your escape tonight. If not, you'll be dead by morning." She let him out of a window, and he made his escape. Then Michal took a dummy god and put it in the bed, placed a wig of goat's hair on its head, and threw a quilt over it. When Saul's men arrived to get David, she said, "He's sick in bed." Saul sent his men back, ordering them, "Bring him, bed and all, so I can kill him." When the men entered the room, all they found in the bed was the dummy god with its goat hair wig. Saul stormed at Michal. "How could you play tricks on me like this? You sided with my enemy, and now he's gotten away." Michal said, "He threatened me. He said, 'Help me out of here or I'll kill you.'" David made good his escape and went to Samuel at Ramah and told him everything Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel withdrew to the privacy of Naioth. Saul was told, "David's at Naioth in Ramah." He immediately sent his men to capture him. They saw a band of prophets prophesying with Samuel presiding over them. Before they knew it, the Spirit of God was on them too, and they were ranting and raving right along with the prophets. That was reported back to Saul, and he dispatched more men. They, too, were soon prophesying. So Saul tried a third time, a third set of men, and they ended up mindlessly raving as well. Fed up, Saul went to Ramah himself. He came to the big cistern at Seku and inquired, "Where are Samuel and David?" A bystander said, "Over at Naioth in Ramah." As he headed out for Naioth in Ramah, the Spirit of God was on him too. All the way to Naioth, he was caught up in a babbling trance. He ripped off his clothes and lay there rambling gibberish before Samuel for a day and a night, stretched out naked. People are still talking about it. Saul among the prophets, who would have guessed?